Guess who's coming to sauna? Hekilunta. Guess who's coming to sauna? Hekilunta. Hey, everybody. Welcome again to another great live episode here of The Upper Bench. Thank you guys for tuning in. And as always, feel free to hit that like and subscribe button. Drop us a comment, interact. Hey, this is your guys' show just as much as it is ours. So we love hearing from you and we love answering questions. As you can tell, we're down. One of our three musketeers is actually over in Finland. So Eero is going to be joining us via video of a little thing that he recorded. But Eero hopefully will be with us next week or the week after. We're going to try to get him on where the time zone isn't such a pain for him, because I believe it's 2 a.m. over there, Risto?
Yeah, early morning, very late night, early morning, however you cut
Yeah.
it.
And I'm sure after traveling, he's all screwed up. So hopefully he's got some good stuff for us. I haven't even seen this video. So, but yeah, Risto, how are we doing?
Doing good. Yeah, pretty chill Sunday evening. Nice sunny day here, so it's
Good
all good.
deal. Yeah, it was a little windy, but yeah, we can't complain. It's when it's above 50, it's good for this guy.
Right. Well, let's let Eero say hi, and then we'll get back to chatting.
And hello, everyone. I am here in Helsinki, Finland at the moment at our apartment. And you can see that I got my bathrobe on, which means that I'm getting ready for the sauna. So there's no time slot, but there's a common hour for all males, and well, there's the other one for females. But anyway, so I'm gonna go to the male sauna to enjoy a good Sunday evening 6 o'clock sauna with my neighbors. I will show you some clips of there soon. And here I am at the sauna, and I'm just gonna show you a little around. Here's the how it probably looks from the outside, and here's kind of a common area. We're gonna go to the dressing room. Here is my neighbor, and here is actually. Let's turn the lights on. Here are the showers, and that's where the sauna is. There, it easily sits like 3-4 people. Let's see if I can open this up. Here we go. And here's the outdoor balcony, which I never get tired of these scenes here. And if you look at there far away, I don't know if you can see it, but there's a ferry that takes you from Helsinki to Stockholm, Sweden. Anyway, so I'm getting ready for the Löyly. I will talk to you later.
Awesome. Very, very cool video there. We got to see a little insight into what Eero is doing in Finland. Very cool rooftop setup he had going on there.
Yeah, and I think you sent us some more videos that we can post later this week. So if people want to see more of his apartment sauna, it looks like a great setup. It'd be fun to use it one of these days.
Yeah, just kind of on the verge of a gym, but not really. It really kind of had that public appeal, but you had all the amenities. You had a little table to sit around in the towel and not worry about dripping on things. Looked like a lot of tile. So can't go wrong.
Yeah, and it's always those little things I think that those Finnish saunas get right, and that's one thing that I've learned from Eero. It's interesting to listen to him. I think we talked to a business of maybe last year about stuff, and I noticed that Eero was like really focused on having a place to rest and hang out, and how important that was. And then I noticed that his sauna in his apartment, they have that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's something to not overlook when you're setting up even your home sauna. Where are you going to cool off in between rounds? If this is stuck down in your basement somewhere, and you got to traipse through the house to get outside, sometimes you might want to rethink that. Maybe an outdoor standalone is more geared towards what you want to be doing. But again, I know when I want to build my dream house, I wouldn't mind a, little, personal electric in my bathroom, on the ensuite bathroom, just for my own personal use. But I still got to have that standalone, get some outdoors involved. I really love how they could just walk right out onto the patio there, overlook the ocean, overlook Helsinki, get some fresh air, really cool off. I bet you that is a brisk air coming off of there, in certain parts of the year. So great place to, cool off and just reconnect. That's really cool.
Yeah. Yeah. It does look like a very good sauna.
Absolutely. So I wanted to see what kind of stove was in there, but I imagine it's got to be an electric, pretty standard model. I didn't really see anything goofy with the benches or anything like that. It looked like there was plenty of almost like a wood step up platform and then, benching surrounding that. So looked like you were getting up off the ground, a little bit, probably not as high as some of us would enjoy, but again, beggars can't be choosers, especially when you're building a big public sauna like that. You got a lot of different people using it. Kind of have to go with the generic probably layout and generic standards.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm sure it's fine. I think, I'm kind of a little bit in the camp of the height. We kind of make a little bit too much of kind of that vertical dimension. It does matter, right? And I do
Mhm.
understand that in the United States, where our building conception is so poor, where you might have like a 12-foot height ceiling and your bench is way down at the floor, then we need to talk about that more. But like as far as like Arrow's apartment, I'm sure if I used it, it would be a great setup.
Oh, 100%. I mean, and you can really get away with a lot. As far as, as long as that thing can breathe and you can kind of create that convection of, warm air, rising and circulating and, really getting that whole room to an even temp. Who cares where, what height you're sitting at? If you're really heating that room evenly and you've got a good, ability to throw some water around and generate some steam, again, it doesn't matter that you're not, the exact height that you need to be at in this, extreme zone of comfort and everything where the Lulu is. But anyway, as long as that heat's evenly distributed, you can really get away with a lot. I think that to me is more key than trying to get dimensions correct and things like that. Make sure that air is flowing. We harp on it a lot: ventilation, ventilation, ventilation. But again, I think that's just something that people just don't think a lot about when they go to build and when they go to use different saunas. They just don't realize that, oh, that what did make that a good sauna? The fact that I had good supply of fresh air the whole time I was using it.
Right, and it's because you maybe didn't even notice that. Maybe you were like, "Oh, that was a good sauna," and you didn't. It's really that it's a very difficult thing to pick up on. You
Yeah.
really have to like kind of have it in mind before you go in, and then use a few different ones and compare them, and then you start to kind of pick up on that. You'd be like, "Oh, it does feel just a little stuffy. If feels a little hot for me." All those things can kind of be indications of that.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And again, we say it every time. If you're getting dizzy or if it's just not feeling right, you're getting a headache. Get out. Open that door up, let some fresh air in, take a break. Because you might be sitting in a situation where that is some stagnant air. Maybe you do have some elevated CO2 levels and things like that. So yeah, just be mindful. If you're not feeling right, listen to your body. Just like being dehydrated or any other condition that might come around. If your body's saying get out, I don't feel good, listen to it. It's okay to push yourself a little bit and try to challenge yourself. But again, if something doesn't feel right, don't be afraid to bounce. You can try again.
Yeah. So, have you sounded this week, Sam, or this weekend?
Yeah, yeah. So we had a good one yesterday. Didn't get around to it today. It's going to be a little late for getting everything fired up tonight, but I usually try to get at least one in on the weekend. With how windy it's been down here, though, that using that wood stove was a little bit of a challenge. I can definitely tell when the wind is up down here, that stove can be a little bit finicky, especially trying to get the baffling right. It really doesn't have a lot of control in that regard. It just has the slide bottom tray, where if you pull it open, you got full air. If you close it, you're really only getting the air that's coming around the door. So with a high wind situation, with at least in my shop where my sauna is, it can get a little gusty. Wind can come through the shop a little goofy, and sometimes you get a little bit of a smoke blowback until that stove is good and hot.
Yeah.
Um, once you get a good hot stove pipe, you've got a really good elevation on that, and you're pulling a lot of air, then you're good to go. But that first half an hour to 45 minutes of a fire in a high wind situation can be a little goofy. So you got to kind of watch it.
Yeah, one thing that I try to do is make really kind of small kindling to start out with, and a good amount of airflow, and I'll even throw on like newspaper on top of it, just not to start the fire, but just to just get a little bit of a fire going on the top, which then starts the airflow. And
Hmm.
I learned that from Shane Lintonen, because he has a big masonry heater in his house that's really cool. And he it has so much, I mean, it has so much piping, and that he you have to like create a draw. So there was like a little area kind of up top where he just lights some paper and puts it in there to help create that draw. So
Yeah, I've heard that before, especially dealing with like home fireplaces. A lot of times, if you ever heard the term "smoke the flue," and so yeah, that I would always see. My family had a wood burning fireplace at one home, and my grandfather would he'd grab a bundle of newspaper or something like that, and he'd light it on fire and just kind of stick it up, hold it in his hand, and stick it up into basically into the flue of the stove and everything, and get it really sucking air until boom, there was no real worry of a backdraft or any smoke really getting into the rest of the house because it was creating that draw. So we see a comment here from the flying fin. Sometimes having a longer chimney can help produce good draft, and that's absolutely true. If you've only got a few feet of chimney, the outside air can really affect what's happening in that chimney, in that stove. So creating a longer distance, or if you do have the option of going straight up or maybe out, and one is longer than the other, and it really doesn't matter to you, having that longer run will help a stove run a little bit more efficiently and more effectively to start.
yeah, and so that is Shane right there. That's Shane
Okay,
comment.
that is Shane. Okay,
Yeah,
he's the Flying Fin 2007. That's
yeah.
awesome.
So does I forget? Does yours go straight up and out?
Yep. Yeah.
Okay.
So mine is straight up and out. So it's probably going up, 8 feet to the ceiling of the sauna. Well, minus I think it's about 24 to 26 inches up where it starts. So you're looking at a good 6 feet up into the roof of the sauna, and then it has to go up out the roof of the shop. So there's where it transitions from the roof of the sauna. We've got a big box thimble, and then it transitions to an old brick chimney that was already previously there,
Nice.
which was in perfectly serviceable order. I was able to connect right into it. It was a 6-inch pipe, just like the stove pipe that was coming out of my stove. So everything lined up and fit really well. Because I kind of actually planned around where that chimney was because it's pre-existing. So I knew I could go right below it and build my sauna pretty much around that starting point.
Very nice.
But
So
yeah, I would say it's probably got at least another 5 to 6 feet from the roof of the sauna. So you're looking at a total of 15 feet or so, give or take. Plenty of Once it gets humming, yeah, it's clean burning, and it really does pull a lot of air from outside the sauna into the hot room.
so so you said you had an existing chimney, and did it have a metal lining in that existing brick chimney?
Yeah, there is a liner. So yeah, I know. That Finn's asking here, a cold brick chimney may also cause some draft issues, which is absolutely true. So, if it is cold, if you're in the northern states, that can affect it because, yeah, you're dealing with brick that might be 10, 15 degrees. So that warm air is hitting that cool, brick hitting that cool metal, maybe liner on the inside, and then kind of re-deciding which direction does it want to go. So luckily down here in the Southeast, usually I'm starting at 40, 50 degrees Fahrenheit on the low end. So I not too worried with the metal line brick being any sort of draft problem.
So how did you
Usually as
tie
long as the wind is down, I'm fine.
yeah, how did you tie into the metal, well, how did you tie into the chimney exactly?
Yeah, so on the top of the stove, there was kind of an adapter that your 6-inch stovepipe sat on top of. And then I was able to basically kind of wedge a piece into the pre-existing stovepipe and then coming out of the wedge. So they kind of created like a V like that. And then when I put them together, they slid and then were the correct size. I just had to cut one of them to the proper size. But
Yep.
then as soon as I pushed them together, they slid and joined, and then it was all one unit.
So it wedges up into the chimney?
Yep.
Okay, sure.
Yep, and then around that would be that black. It's almost I think it's about an 18-inch square box, a wall thimble box.
Yeah, that's what I've
And
heard.
then yeah, there was I believe used some of the what is that the rock wool insulation just to kind of make sure that it was insulated from any wood or anything like that.
That's good. I think I just had air inside of mine inside that box, but
Mhm.
I maybe I should put some rock wool.
Yeah, it couldn't hurt because where the box itself was pretty short, and probably only an inch or two. Yeah, probably only 10 inches, maybe 12, just to kind of go through the 2x4 ceiling, and then create a little bit of a distance around any other rafters or anything like that in the shop. So I thought, I'm just going to put, a little bit, kind of line it around where the opening was, just if there was any like massive heat escape or anything like that, it pretty much absorb it.
And were you going through that box with this is a show where I get to just grill Sam with a bunch of questions.
Yeah, yeah, I love it.
Were you going through that box? Was it just single wall? Was it double wall? Was it insulated?
Yeah, so for those that are looking to do this in maybe a residential home or something like that, I would definitely suggest using a double-walled insulated stovepipe. They come, I believe it's stainless steel. But yeah, if you're going through a wall that you're gonna insure and reside in, definitely recommend going through it with a double insulated. But for mine, this is out in my wood shop. I wasn't too concerned of it because I've got good clearances on everywhere else. So mine is just single walled up right into the brick. So
Sure.
not too concerned with it. I have had zero charring. I've done some inspection up there and just kind of shine my flashlight around, crawled around on top of the sauna in between the rafters, and really there's really no wood or anything like that that could even become a problem area.
Yeah. Yeah, and that piping, that can get expensive. That double wall insulated pipe is really expensive. I was helping a friend build his sauna, and I had looked into even just doing like the single wall, just the different diameter and throwing, I'm trying to remember what it was. It might have been like some sort of ceramic fiber insulation or
Mhm.
something. I'm not sure what the commercial insulation is. It might be something like that.
Yeah. And really for the price difference, you might be able to get away with that if you're comfortable, with the DIY. I remember, my first sauna build, I did use a double walled insulated piece to go through my shed wall because I had to go through the wall and then up. And I was a little concerned because there wasn't a lot of run before it 90'd out through the wall. So that I knew it was going to get pretty hot, and because where it 90'd into the double, you could almost tell it would almost get red in certain stove situations. But that was, I believe it, I mean, that was probably 2018, 2019, and I got a 3-foot section of double walled insulated stovepipe, and I believe it was like $120. It was crazy, and I'm sure it's gone way up since then.
Oh yeah, like all the piping for to go out, and then all the roof stuff. That was a huge part of the cost of our sauna.
Yeah, yeah. People don't realize that, that there are some ups and downs, to a wood burning construction. Stovepipe is not something to be thought of as an afterthought. You do need to budget for it because it's going to become at least, probably a 5% to 10% budgetary item.
Yeah, but electric these days, you look at the stove, but then you have to buy like all the controller stuff separate, some of that electronics, a lot of the
Mhm.
times, not all the time. But that could be like $1,000, $1,500 just for the extra electronics.
Yeah, it's surprising. I mean, I know a lot of these stove manufacturers nowadays have apps for phones, but the app really isn't coming from the stove itself. It's coming from the controller. And so this little controller box, really hamstrings some people because I think, how hard would it be to create even just a Bluetooth connected stove that you could just run off of your phone. Just have it be an app and boom. And I agree, charging to be able to turn your sauna on and off, charging $1,000 to do that, that's crazy to me. I definitely am not a huge fan of the manual controls, the old dials and things like that, the old timers. You have to sit in your sauna and hear that click, 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 click like an egg timer, and you'd go crazy. Not a big fan of that, but I do think there needs to be an easier way. And I'm sure, definitely the guys on Reddit and then on some of these web forums, they've hacked these things. But again, it's not for the average guy to be able to do that wiring.
Right. Yeah, there should be and Shane says here it's less than $50 in parts. And he's right. It's super basic. It's just a little bit of a controller board with all the electronic controllers and connections. But, like electric, it's really basic. It's either sending the electrical power or not, and then you just need some sort of board to say yes or no, and then like an algorithm that says when to do that, and then it's also taking back in usually a temperature measure, right? So it is super duper basic. I would love to see. It'd be nice to have some just really cheap off the shelf thing that you could just get and use with any heater.
Oh, good. Here we go. So he used a spa controller from Amazon, about $80, and has the phone app, and can control the sauna with that. So boom, it is possible. Definitely possible. I've seen guys, on Reddit, they've, hooked theirs up to a Raspberry Pi so that they could, do some additional things with it, maybe set some better timers or use their own apps or connect it to the rest of their connected home or smart home setup. Some of these guys nowadays, they can just do voice activated everything from their lights to their TV and sound systems. And why not your sauna? If you can
Right.
tell and ask Alexa what time it is, you might as well have her, set a timer for setting your sauna up too.
Yeah, I think I even remember Shane talking about someone back in the day in Thunder Bay, um, setting up a thing, and maybe he can remind us what it is. You're welcome to come on the show, Shane, if you want. But setting up a thing. This was back in maybe the 90s, 80s. I'm not sure when, but that you would just call. He would call on the phone to start the sauna. There's a ton of ways that you can do it.
Oh, absolutely. I always thought about maybe, I'm sure it'd be dangerous, but, set up a little remote control motor to just pull a string if I sent it a text message, and that would just pull a strike anywhere match and light a little, fire starter, in my stove, and hopefully not burn my shop down.
Well, do they have electrically controlled, like pellet stoves? Like electronically controlled, remote controlled pellet stoves?
I don't know how commercially available they are to ignite, but I mean, really, the technology is all there. I mean, you could use an electric grill starter, um, and create a spark to ignite, some kind of a starter propellant, a little fire starter or whatever have it be, even a piece of cotton or something like that.
Yeah, well, it's just like a water heater, a furnace or something, something. They're just ready to
Yeah.
go.
Yeah, and
Um,
I suppose, with the gas, you've got the pilot light going where it's just sending, open the valve or close the valve. It's gotta be something out there for it.
yeah. Yeah, I just learned recently, you probably already know this, Sam. I am not very good with like house stuff, but I just learned I was working on our water heater this week and I was looking for the power cord. I was figuring out where because it wasn't starting. I was looking
Oh,
for where it connects with the power cord and I'm like there's no electrical connection. How in the world does this thing function? And I learned that there is no electrical connection. My mind was blown that it just uses this little crystal to light it, and once it's lit, it uses it's like a thermocouple something or other to generate whatever electricity it needs. So it's using gas, but
yep.
then powering the electronics. I thought that was pretty ingenious.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and really, you gotta think it really just needs enough, energy to kind of run a thermostat,
Yeah.
and take a signal, yes or no, and, yeah, again, it home ownership again, you learn something new all the time. I moved into this house a few years back and I'm still finding things out about it. It's like, oh, okay, maybe that's how they did that. Or, this is my first house with a crawl space. So now I'm, every other weekend I'm down in my crawl space with a flashlight crawling around, making sure, things are hooked up or things are going well. So just put in a dehumidifier in the crawl space because it is very humid and moist down here, and that's just something you got to worry about. But um, Bad Cat had something on here. What is that?
Let's see, says, good evening. What do you think about a sauna tent and a wood stove for a beginner? It's in Maine, winter, summer, or in the basement. You love a beautiful sauna, but the person might move. Um, and he's assuming electric heater has to be 220. And yeah, generally speaking, electric does need to be 220. So it looks like a beginner set question is what to do for a beginner sauna if you might move.
Sure. So something portable. The tent sauna is definitely an option. It's something that you can bring with you. You can strap it to your back and go hiking and set it up, on the top of a nice hike with a view, or you can take it, wherever you're going with you. And I do think, if you've got a little wood stove in there that's cranking out some BTUs and you can splash a little water on top of it, why not? I think that's better than, sacrificing and doing something either indoors that might not just make sense. And especially if you don't have the wiring or any of the power capabilities, and doing a construction in somewhere that you might leave doesn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah, I might recommend a barrel over a tent. Now barrel's going to have its own issues. You're gonna have to make sure you get a roof on there. Um, and it's not going to be something that's around probably for 30 years. They don't hold up super duper well, but it's easier to get in. I think the experience can be a little better than a tent. And I'm not sure what the longevity is, to be honest, on those tents. I'm guessing it can't be that long. Um, they'll be a little bit cheaper perhaps than a barrel, but I might go with build something more square, do a build, maybe a cheaper build on and put it on skids. Um, don't make the mistake we made where we built our sauna for fairly inexpensively. We use cheap wood, but we didn't put it on skids, and then to move it was we had to take it apart piece by piece. But if you build something smaller on skids, that's kind of a little bit more small shed size, you're gonna have, I think, something pretty good, better than a barrel, better than a tent, and you can move it.
Yeah, and really, it comes down to what's your budget.
Yeah.
I think for $1,500, I think you could build something on skids. that is pretty darn cool. Now, granted, it's not going to be cedar. It's not going, to be aesthetically pleasing, something you're going to want to put on Instagram, but there's definitely things you can do to beautify it, but, and make it your own. But again, a solid little base on, some green treated skids. You make a little deck platform to build it on top of. You use, even 2x2s or 2x3s to save some cost and size and weight. And you could build your benches separate, put them in and out. So that if you did go to move it or anything like that, you could take those benches out, reducing weight, making it a little bit more portable. And yeah, you could either pipe in a little wood burning stove, especially, those little tent ones that, they still pump out a lot of heat, or even better, find something used on Facebook Marketplace. I'm sure you could find a little wood stove or something like that for cheaper than you're going to buy something new that is going to be half the quality, or half the size. So
Yeah.
again, it all depends on what your DIY capabilities are, because I think, again, you don't need a heck of a lot of tools to do this, people. You need a drill driver combo. You need to be able to drill a hole. You need to be able to screw a screw, and you probably need maybe a circular saw or some kind of a saw, to make sure that you're cutting stuff to length. But really, you don't need a lot.
No, and is something great about building that first one kind of on the cheap, you don't want it to be your ideal because you're going to learn so much. If you spent 6 months researching and you build like your $25,000, like just your dream sauna, you're still going to do things wrong. And then you spent so much on that. Whereas if you try and get something for like, 3 to 5 on skids, I think that's a good option.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, people's budgets are going to change. I think, for myself, I would love, if I was going to maybe buy some mountain land down here or something like that, which is something I'd love to do, but probably not going to be able to build a house or build a structure out on that land very soon. But what I could do is maybe get a small shipping container, maybe one of the 8 foot by 8 foot, pretty much square little cubes, and you could easily set that out, on some rails, some railway ties, level it out, and build a pretty cool little sauna inside of there. And then, at the end of the weekend, after you've cut some trees down or you've gone camping or whatever it is, you shut the metal doors up, and boom, it's just a metal cube out in the forest or out in the, woods somewhere, and you don't have to worry about it. I think that would be a really cool option for people that maybe don't have a structure to build, or maybe they don't want to, pour a foundation, or have something that is long term. Because you could come in there with a heavy duty forklift, and off road forklift, and pick this thing up, load it on a flatbed truck or trailer, and get it out of there just as easy as it came in.
Yeah, so let me quiz you some more on that. I've got some questions about that type of a build.
Yeah.
But what before I do that, just everyone know, take a look at the pinned comment. If you want to join us and geek out or chat or share your ideas, you're welcome to join the stream too, or ask any questions. But so did you say an 8x8? Was it like an 8x8 cube shipping container? And
Yeah, I
box?
can't remember the specific dimensions. They either might be 8 by 10, or they might be 8 by 8, but it's roughly around a square 8 foot container.
Okay. And like, what does that run? And then, like, what would you do for drainage?
Yeah, and so if anyone is familiar with, shipping containers, so I mean, really, it's, prefabricated metal box, and these things are waterproof, weatherproof, and it's how your goods are shipped across the oceans. And they have large metal swing doors that seal up. And so what I think would be kind of cool is you've got the structure there. You don't need a heck of a lot more, as far as, structural material to keep the building upright. It's already there. You just need to line the inside out, with what you want to do. And all shipping containers are going to have pretty much a hardwood floor base. And so there's your starting point. Like you mentioned, putting in a drain, you can easily, drill a hole through there, cut a hole through the metal, and have a drain out, basically to the either the ground, or create maybe a French drain with some, gravel or something like that. Easily ready to do, because the shipping container is naturally going to be up a few inches off the ground already, because it's going to be probably forklift ready. So it's going to already be 2 or 3 inches up off the ground. So you're going to have some ground clearance to work with. Now, you may not see it when it's sitting there, but it is going to be a little bit raised up. There's all the ridges and things like that.
Well, you mentioned the railroad ties. So, I mean, that can get you, I mean, that's going to get
Even
you up
higher.
whatever 8 inches or whatever it is. But
Yeah, so then, if you did, build it onto maybe a platform of either rail skids, or even its own, corner foundations or something like that, it would not be very hard to pipe, or, even plumb in a drain out to, if you needed it to go somewhere else, and not just where it was at. It'd be very easy and accessible to do. But then really you're worried about the biggest thing, I think, with a shipping container that most people worry about is going to be your moisture issues, because it doesn't breathe. The things are sealed up very tight. And so they do make vents that are specific for shipping containers, and they're weatherproof vents. They're basically plastic out. If you ever look at a shipping container, you may see a plastic kind of square that's bulging out, and it's going to have holes on the bottom, but it'll be solid on the top, for any rainwater or anything like that will basically go off of it. But it allows for you to put holes in your shipping container, and then for it to breathe, but not allow water in if it were to rain or anything like that. So you could put a few of those in.
where are those usually put? Sides, top? Where does that usually go?
Yeah, so I would recommend, depending on how you're going to set up your sauna within that box, you may have a door with a gap. When the metal doors are open, I imagine you'd have a door right there into a hot room. So you may have a gap there. So that wall is probably going to be fine as far as, ventilation is concerned. So you're going to be more worried about the sides and maybe the back. Um, I wouldn't put anything in the roof on a shipping container. If you don't have to touch the roof, don't, because it'll be pretty much solid the whole life of the structure. And so I would do probably, you could do four, in the corners. So then you could then potentially have the whole thing could breathe maybe on the between the between the wall and the metal. You'd want that to be able to breathe, so that if there wasn't any moisture or really humid air trapped,
Yep.
so that it could escape. Um, Maybe on the inside you had sliders then, into the hot room. You've basically got a gap. You've got insulation there. You could maybe move that insulation away a little bit from that air gap, and then have a slider on the inside of the hot room, so that when, depending on which way the wind's going, or which, how the sauna is operating at that given time, you could then have maybe four different vents that you could open and close, and get it just right for, the wind, or get it just right for the temperature.
Yeah. So would you tell me what you think of this? Like, I might be tempted not to do any insulation. I might just do like some sort of wood just inside the walls. I don't know how you would attach it, if screwing it would just be fine, but some sort of little kind of standoff wood that then I put my paneling on those. So it would have a pretty decent sizable air gap.
Yeah, and I think with a wood stove, again, you're probably not going to have to worry too much about insulation and keeping heat retained. So, depending on where this thing is going to sit and reside, that might be an option to either forego it, or to use maybe or just a solid insulation like a board. I know there are some insulated boards that even have a foil on one side of them. So if you want to get that foil vapor barrier kind of effect with your heat, you could use, a few pieces of that in between, the metal and the wood.
Well, and I've heard of people, even in northern Minnesota, I've heard of people doing like just a real simple build where it does have the exterior structure of your sauna building, your shed, it's shed-like structure that's wood, and then an air gap, and then the interior paneling. And they say that, it does fine even in cold weather.
Yeah, it's really the same theory as the insulated cup, right? You're creating some kind of a gap in between the outside and the inside that is going to keep the inside in and keep the outside out. And so, I think, however we do that, either being, wood mass, like in your sauna, Risto, you don't have insulation because they're big chunks of wood.
Yep.
I mean, you don't have to worry about really any temperature variance going through that 6 inches of wood. But if you're just using a thin quarter-inch tongue and groove cedar, on top of some foil, that is going to definitely transfer heat, and so you may want to have insulation behind it.
Yep. Looks like we have a question about ceramic stones. If we have any experience with those ceramic stones, I'm trying to remember what they're called in Finnish. Kerkis, something like that.
So, are we talking on the actual stove itself?
I think so. Where they manufacture those ceramic stones.
Oh, okay. And I got to imagine, they're made of the right material where they're not going to deteriorate or anything like that. I got to imagine they're not cheap.
Yeah, especially to ship them over. And I'm never. I love that they have so many options across the pond, over in Europe,
Hmm.
but I'm not a huge fan of, shipping a lot of that, especially the heavy stuff over here. I'd rather see it, that we get our stuff locally. Um,
Yeah, absolutely. And Risto, you're lucky you're still up there, close to Superior. I think, if I were to, build a sauna, and I was, within a half a day's drive of Lake Superior's shoreline, I'd probably go be rummaging around before spending 80, 90, $100 in shipping costs
oh, yeah.
when you don't have to.
Well, and, I don't have tons of experience owning saunas. We've had a few, but not for very many years. But I've gone and used, over 100 different saunas in various places. Those Lake Superior rocks are real good.
Mhm.
So I don't have any problem with those at all.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I saw a picture on Reddit recently. Guy had agates in his sauna stove, and
That's cool.
I mean, those things have been formed over, thousands of years, crazy amounts of pressure, and yeah, I think it was just a kind of a cool little accent. He had a few different agates on his sauna, so I got to imagine that was definitely North Shore, northern Wisconsin, or UP, within an hour of the lake.
Yeah, I like that. Um, Looks like just a follow up. Thought about getting an old tent trailer that you could get for cheap, rip everything off. I think as long as the trailer can hold the weight that you're going to put on there, shouldn't be a problem. They can get pretty heavy with the wood and the rocks and the stove and everything. So you do want to make sure that it can handle that.
Yeah, and I think that's why we see so many horse trailers get converted to saunas, because many of them are going to be dual axle trailers that can withstand, 5 to 10,000 pounds. If you're hauling a Clydesdale down the road, those things aren't very light, and so I definitely recommend, using a trailer that is rated for more than what you're going to be putting on it, because if you go and grab the 5,000 pound, Home Depot special, and then go build a full blown wood, sauna on top of it. Oh well, I did the math. It's only 4,800 pounds. Well, yeah, you're stretching that trailer to its limits, and going down the road is gonna might be scary at best.
Yeah, the little so when we moved to Michigan, we were without a sauna. So we found one on Craigslist. The guy had built up in the UP, and we said, "Hey, can we pay you a few extra $100 to bring it down to us down in Lower Michigan?" And so he did. It was awesome. So he delivers this trailer to us, and that was the only option we could do. We were renting at a townhouse, so we couldn't even put a barrel in the backyard really. Um, So, but we could put anything we want in our driveway as long as it fits. So we
Yep.
had the mobile sauna, and it worked fantastic. But we did have to take it to get it weighed and to get it licensed and everything for it. I think it was, I'm trying to remember what the total weight was. I think it was less than 3,000 pounds. So as long as you don't do anything too extravagant, um, I think you're right. You do want a little bit of headroom, on that trailer. You don't want to push it right up to the edge.
Yeah, and then what a lot of people don't realize too, if you've never hauled anything with a trailer before, how that weight is distributed on the trailer can affect how it rides too. So if all of a sudden you've got, a single axle trailer and you've got all this weight that is behind that axle, when you pull that down the road, the trailer is going to naturally going to want a dogtail. And so, just something to think about if you are building a structure on a trailer. Make sure the majority, or the bulk of that weight is between that axle and the vehicle that is towing it. That's just going to make it ride smoother, and that's just going to be a little bit safer going down the road. So if you are building a mobile sauna, don't build it all the way on the back end of that trailer and think that you're going to have a cool sit down area in the front of the trailer. Flip it around. You'll thank me later.
Hmm. So another comment about the stones. Now I saw an article on Sauna Times where they were talking about getting some stones from landscaping place. I think that there are more options for sauna stones than we realize, and you can always test them. Like I've heard a few different ways of testing them. Have you heard about that?
Yeah, I've done one, version of testing of sauna stoves, because I when I lived in Minnesota, I lived near the Mississippi River, and I was wondering if those river stones, could maybe hold up, or could they pass muster. And so what we would do is we would have a bonfire, where we would just have a, kind of just a regular old fire in the backyard, maybe some brush and things like that. But we'd put those stones in that fire. And then after a while, when that we know everything had been really up to, it's probably as hot as it's going to ever be. We would take a bottle of water, and pour it on those rocks, and you would have a few of those rocks that they would crack instantly, or they'd split open. But any of the rocks that kind of survive that, if they could survive a full blown, the heat from a fire and then the cool down from a bottle of water, they were probably okay for a sauna.
Yeah, I've heard. Yep, I've heard that method. I've heard of hitting them with a hammer. Um, I haven't tried that. But if it were me, I would look locally at a landscaping place or like a quarry and kind of tell them what you're looking for. They might not totally understand, but you might say, "Hey, um, I'm looking for something that can handle like some extreme thermal contrast without cracking. Anything that might kind of be in that realm. Could I get like a few different options and try a few different options? They might just give it to you like three or four to bring back and try. But I would think that anywhere in North America should have some local options.
Yeah. And I mean, and lava rock is always going to be an option. And if you do call up one of your landscapers and they just don't speak sauna, or they don't know what you're getting at, maybe turn a phrase and say, hey, maybe I need this. I'm trying to build a rock stove pipe, or maybe I'm building a rock stove, or, rock pizza oven. I'm doing some masonry work, and I'm going to want to do some rocks in my pizza oven. What kind of rocks wouldn't break if they were in a pizza oven? Because I got to imagine if they can do a pizza oven, they can withstand sitting on top of a sauna stove.
Right, and you can just do a little homework to find. It might be helpful to find the type of rock that you're kind of looking at, like what category, and then ask about those specifically. One thing that you might want to be a little bit aware of is I've heard people say that there's perhaps a concern with radon, or any other sort of I don't know what other things there could be in rocks, like a naturally occurring thing that you wouldn't necessarily want a lot of in your sauna. So I'm not sure like how much of a concern that would be, but that might also be something to be on your radar.
Yeah, so if you're building a sauna in New Mexico and you're going out to the desert and digging up some rocks, maybe not the ones you want in your sauna.
Well, but yeah, but radon's like everywhere, even here
Right.
where we're at. And it's not necessarily a little bit about it, don't take health advice from random people on YouTube, but I've heard that like a little bit isn't necessarily so bad. It's just above a certain limit for a long exposure of time. But I think I've read that like granite countertops can have some radon. But there might be some other things to be aware of in the rock. You might want to just do your homework just a little bit to make sure you're not putting something toxic in your sauna.
Yeah, absolutely. And if it's glittery and sparkly and it's got a rough exterior, sometimes yeah, just doing those tests can expose if that rock can do it or not. Because I would probably just try to stay away from rocks that have visible cracks, stay away from porous rocks, where, if a lot of water can get inside of the rock and then expand quickly, that could create a pressure enough to split it or maybe send a little piece of rock, flying across the sauna hot room. And again, I'm a big fan of sitting in there in my birthday suit. So the last thing I want is a hot rock flying across the room at me.
Yeah, that's going to be an interesting arrival to the ER. Just Sam in his birthday suit with a hot rock.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, how did you get this burn here? Well, I was making pizza rolls. No, I can't imagine. But luckily, I've not had to experience, a big sauna rock failure. I've seen plenty of rocks, split, doing that test or in the bonfire. But again, it's in a controlled environment. You're outside the hot room. You're not enclosed. Again, don't be doing this if don't use your sauna as your experiment room either. If you're using rocks that you don't know what they're going to do with, don't use your sauna as the test ground. Go start a small bonfire somewhere where it's safe to do so. Even if you have one of those little metal fire pit rings that you put on your driveway and sit and burn there, you could easily get the rocks super hot enough to test doing something like that.
Do you think it's an urban legend about these shooting rocks?
You know, I'm gonna say no because I do know that there are definitely ways to recreate it.
Hmm.
And so if you can recreate something, it's got it, the probability of it just happening, to somebody else is probably pretty high, right? Just in general chance. So like if you have a really waterlogged rock, that is holding water. There are certain geodes out there. There are certain different types of rocks that actually have a cavity of water sealed with inside them. If you boil those rocks or get them hot enough, they can and do explode. And so I think, given the fact that you can recreate that, somebody's got to probably, accidentally stumbled upon that on their sauna, maybe.
Which I'm sure has happened, especially if it's a DIY, you're just grabbing rocks from wherever. I'm sure that could happen.
Oh yeah, and I think back to we always kind of talk about the early days of sauna, the hunter gatherers, nomadic saunas of hundreds and thousands of years ago. I got to imagine there was some trial and error there when they were building some of their first nippies and saunas, and grabbing rocks to heat up in their sabu saunas blowing up or something like that. So definitely some trial and error there for a number of years.
Yeah. Yeah, that would have been if I had a time machine, I'd love to go back to some of those earliest saunas. I imagine they figured out hot rocks pretty early on for just as a way to store heat in a place where you need to store heat. But
Yeah.
then someone's kind of raising that temperature in the tent or wherever they've got dug out, and they really like it very warm, which is understandable when it's cold, and then some crazy person splashes a little bit of water and is like, "Whoa," and then there's the
Yep.
birth of sauna.
Oh, I got to imagine it was almost like a little kid, right? So it was, some hunter-gatherer family. They warmed up rocks, near the fire, and then okay, it was time for bed. They shuffled a few of the larger rocks maybe around or something like that, and got it to maybe their tent was warming up. And me as a little kid, I remember, seeing a glowing piece of metal, be it the stove or a fire pit or anything like that. The first thing I ever wanted to do was, sprinkle some water on there and see the water boil off of it, right? And so I can just imagine this little kid running into the tent and splashing some water on the rocks because he thought it'd be funny to, see it steam and boil off. And then all of a sudden they sat back and was like, "Ooh, that kind of felt good. Do that again. That'd be nice."
Yeah. And that's why steam is like so much the heart of sauna. Once you pull that away or you strip that away, we can argue about the definition, have we crossed a certain line or whatever, but we certainly taken away that the kind of the joy and the fun of sauna. Like I was sauning last night at Julie's mom's house, so I used their electric sauna again. We got a little hotter this time. I think we are 180 something, and there's a ton of rocks.
That's
So I'm
good.
throwing water on the side of those rocks, and I just love seeing that cloud of steam come off the side.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And the thing we kind of touched on there too was all we were really talking about was a heated rock inside of a room that you sprinkled some water on to generate steam. Didn't matter how that rock got hot. That rock could have gotten that hot from just the sun. It could have gotten that hot from an electric stove. It could have gotten that hot from a fire. It could have gotten that hot from who knows. But the fact that we were in enclosed area enough to, and it was hot enough to maybe boil some water off of it, I think we hit the elements there. And so again, it doesn't matter. We talk a lot about wood stoves versus electric versus IR versus whatever, smoke sauna versus, the blankets and gadgets and gizmos they're calling saunas nowadays. But I think, we do have that core definition. We got to be putting some water on some hot rocks to have, some good steam.
Yeah, or even metal. You mentioned metal. I think I've read about banyas, like, in Russia where they just had, like, pig iron, just giant chunks of this iron inside a masonry, just a giant masonry wall, heater.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
could
And,
be
and
too.
Absolutely, and I think when you're getting into that type of size, I think it really doesn't matter what it is. It could be rock, it could be metal, it could be whatever ceramic, stone, whatever it might material it be. And when you're getting into that kind of size and you're throwing water against it and you're getting steam out of it, sign me up.
Yep, yep. Um, well, if there's anyone, it looks like we have a few people watching still. If you want to pop on real quick, say hi. Or if you have any last questions, don't be shy. It's easy. You just click the link. You can do it on your cell phone. And you can say hi real quick. Trying to think of what else to talk about. We got to sauna twice this week. One of them was kind of a little bit of a sad sauna. We had
Mm.
a family member come down, which was good to see them, but they just had a miscarriage. They just, so they just lost a pregnancy, which was
Mhm.
sad. But that's, I think, part of the sauna experience as well. Is I've had a few saunas like this where you're heating up those rocks if for kind of it's during a sad situation. Another real good friend of mine came down and sounded with me after his dad died. It's being in the sauna in a difficult time is kind of a nice thing actually.
Yeah, I really do think like some of the most open, honest, communication that you can have with someone is in that hot room. When you're sitting in there sweating your butt off, you're breathing heavy, you're drinking water, you're just sitting in there really just kind of connecting with somebody. You're usually pretty close with that person already if you're sitting in a hot room with them, especially if it's your own sauna or something like that. But I do feel like the conversation is a lot richer, and a lot more meaningful because I think a lot of people, again, they're going to be disconnected from their phone. They're not having their phone in there. So that's a huge win for everything communications, in regards to. But when you're in that hot room, I think there's a little bit of a timer. where you can't just ramble on. You kind of have to get to the point a little bit, and you kind of have to choose your words maybe a little bit more carefully. So you think and maybe take a step back and pause, and you think about what you're actually going to say, because things are a little bit slower. You're worried about your breath. You're thinking about what's going on, and I think, yeah, you're getting the best out of people. You're getting the best out of communication when you're sitting up there on the upper bench.
Yeah, because it can take some of those inhibitions away because your brain is thinking about, "Oh boy, I'm hot in here," or, "Oh, that was some steam." So that's
Mhm.
helpful. But then also you get, as you do it through the rounds, you get the feel good chemicals, which if you're going through a really difficult time, you may not have that, you may be kind of depressed, kind of down because of whatever's happening. So it is nice to have a little bit of a boost and a respite from that.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's a great point, Risto, because again, I know if I get down, or if friends or family that I know get down, one of the first things to go is exercise, getting out there, moving around. And if you're not doing those things, it kind of snowballs out of you feel lethargic, you're tired more. But when you get in and out of that sauna, your heart rate's bumping a little bit. You don't have to be moving around to get that heart rate up. So it is nice to really just get a little bit of that mini exercise and get that blood flowing, get those feel good chemicals going in your brain when there isn't much else out there for you.
Yep. Yep. Well, I don't see any more questions. Anything else that you had to chat about?
No, I think we're doing good here. I like these little Sunday sessions. Even though Arrow's not with us tonight, this was a fun chat. I want to thank everybody who's watching us. Thank you guys on YouTube for dropping us comments, questions. You guys are the ones that really keep the wheels going on this thing. Risto and I are just here kind of fielding your questions, and we love it. It keeps our conversation going. And again, next time, feel free. You can hop in. You don't have to be on video. If you want to just be on audio, we can do it call-in style. Otherwise, again, your questions and comments in the chat are always welcome. We love seeing you guys, and we do thank you for joining in again with us. Risto, anything you got before we're heading off here?
Yeah, we'll see who are the first few brave ones that come on. So
Yeah, and I think I might even be able to scrounge up some upper bench swag, stuff from Toronto that I might still have a few items. I know I've got some coasters, some leather coasters that are punched with the upper bench logo. And I think we're going to try to get some more swag here this year, maybe some towels or some sauna hats or something like that. If there's anything that you guys want to see with the upper bench logo on it, give us a buzz, or feel free, steal our logo and brand it on something. If it looks cool, hey, maybe we'll steal it back. But again, feel free, put our logo on something and wear it around. Tell your friends and family about us. It's always a good time. We don't care.
well, I know what I want. I think I've mentioned this before, and I won't get too specific in case we end up doing this, but you mentioned Toronto, like there's the one of the ladles we used at the public place over there. I fell in love with that ladle. So I tried to get a hold of the guy. Maybe I just need to try a little bit harder, but I would love to be able to sell those ladles to people and have one for myself that has our logo on it. Those were some seriously heavy duty ladles.
Yeah, and they were classic, old school. I mean, big old thick wooden handle. I don't know if that was a copper cup or if it was
I don't
steel,
think it was. Yeah, I think just
but
steel.
and you could definitely do whatever you like. I could definitely see a cool like hammered copper
Oh yeah.
version. We could get really cool with it. If you've got, I'm going to shoot this out to, anybody listening, anybody watching. If you've got cool sauna accessories, take pictures of them and send it to us. We'd love to do an episode where we just talk about the cool different accessories that are out there, because I think over the last 2-3 years, there's been some cool stuff that's come out that has kind of gone under the radar. And I'd love to do an episode about it.
Yeah, maybe we chat about that more next time because there have been some cool new ones, but then also there's a lot of real, just crap out there. So um
Yeah,
it'd be interesting to chat about that.
absolutely. Well, As always, thank you guys. It's been a pleasure. Until next time, you can always find us on theupperbench.com, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. Check us out. Drop us a line. Love to hear from you.